So this is the second video in which I tackle a pillar of Jordan Peterson's religious beliefs, and so if you haven't already watched the first, which is dedicated to his epistemology, then I'd highly recommend that you do. If only because, not surprisingly, his concept of truth is tightly intertwined with his other religious beliefs, including those regarding archetypes. Now, before we get to business, as it were, the winner of this month's giveaway has won a signed copy of Aron Ra's Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism. You lucky heretic. And so, if you're a patron, be sure to stick around till the end to see if you're the lucky winner. Anyhow, back to business. This is Jordan Peterson's Archetypes Debunked. So I'm going to begin by laying down a bit of groundwork, and I'll explain precisely why in just a moment. The word archetype has existed for millennia, and its etymology is rooted in ancient Greek. The prefix arche means primitive or origin, and the suffix tupos means pattern, model, or type, and so the word originally meant original model. These days, however, it's generally used to describe a very typical or perfect example of a particular kind of person or thing, and it's primarily used in reference to books and films. For example, characters that are archetypically the mentor tend to be old, wise, parental figures to especially hero archetypes, and they tend to teach others, reveal a larger world, and are removed before the end so that the hero can face the Leviathan, or villain archetype, alone. And so, in a nutshell, archetypes are stereotypes. Carl Jung's perspective of archetypes, however, gets a little deeper. As many of you already know, Jung was a contemporary and adversary of Freud, and while both men recognised what Freud called the unconscious and Jung called the personal unconscious, Jung additionally insisted that we have a collective unconscious. The unconscious, or personal unconscious, refers to feelings and information that was once conscious but has been since forgotten and or repressed, while the collective unconscious refers to innate, inherited, psychological instincts and patterns of thought and behaviour. The key difference being, in the words of Jung, that the collective unconscious is a part of the psyche which can be negatively distinguished from the personal unconscious by the fact that it does not, like the latter, owe its existence to personal experience and consequently is not a personal acquisition.
It is quite certain that man is born with a certain functioning, a certain way of functioning, a certain pattern of behavior, and that is expressed in the form of archetypal images or archetypal forms.
Now, just before we move on, I want to clear up a major misconception regarding Jungian archetypes. Or more accurately, he does. In his last book, Man and His Symbols, he wrote that my views about the archaic remnants, which I call archetypes or primordial images, have been constantly criticised by people who lack a sufficient knowledge of the psychology of dreams and of mythology. The term archetype is often misunderstood as meaning certain definite mythological images or motifs, but these are nothing more than conscious representations. Such variable representations cannot be inherited. The archetype is a tendency to form such representations off a motif, representations that can vary a great deal in detail without losing their basic pattern. And so that's Jungian archetypes. It's the name given to evolved, instinctual patterns of thought and behaviour, which are often expressed unconsciously through our stories and myths, with the latter being where religions reside. Just as turtles are born with the psychological instinct to reach water, which can be seen as a rendition of their mother archetype, humans are born with the psychological instinct to avoid snakes, which can be seen as a rendition of our monster or villain archetype. In short, we're not born with a clean slate. Anyhow, what exactly does this have to do with Peterson? Well, Peterson takes Jungian archetypes and claims that very specific variants of archetypes, that being very specific Christian variants, are true. But we'll get to that in just a minute. For now, here's an example of Peterson both endorsing and eloquently explaining Jungian archetypes in reference to snakes.
I believe that the fundamental myths they're evolved. They're deeply rooted in us. And the right way of thinking about that is really, it's like the myth of dropping a stick on a snake. That's St. George, right? And the world-creating hero very frequently creates the world out of the parts of a reptilian monster. Well, that's a story that's I don't know how many millions of years old. It's old. Snakes were eating us when we lived in trees. They were one of our primary predators. And the first tree-dwelling primate precursor who dropped a stick on a snake was pretty popular with the ladies.
And here's him illustrating how the serpent archetype, among many other archetypes, manifests itself among our most beloved stories, such as Harry Potter.
You know, look, the second Harry Potter volume with the basilisk. Okay, it's a magical kingdom. That's the school. The kids are in it. Harry's a rule breaker who's touched by evil. That's what makes him a hero. The basilisk is a predator. It's a snake. It lives underneath the school. It can shake everything to pieces. If you look at it, it freezes you. Why? Because that's how a prey animal responds to a predator. Frozen. It's a snake. It lives underneath everything. That's right, because the snake can shake everything to pieces at any moment. And the magical school is built on chaos. Harry has to go underneath, down, way down, to find the source of the basilisk. He actually gets into it through a toilet or through a bathroom, right? He goes to the dark place, right? The place of refuse and rejection, down into the bowels of the substructure to face the basilisk. What happens? He frees Ginevra, virgin, and he's half killed doing it. What happens? A phoenix comes along and cries in his wounds. A phoenix is a symbol of rebirth.
Now, in my estimation, that's a pretty awesome analysis. In fact, it captures one of the things I find valuable about Peterson. He's very good at delving deep into the psychology of our stories and identifying their biological underpinnings. That is, he's very good at illustrating that Jung was right, that it's very easy to understand why stories and myths, such as Harry Potter, are loved the world over. They're not just made up. They're expressions of our biological substructure. They reach deep down into the very core of our psychology, and because of this, they're extremely valuable.
Yes, it goes to the deepest that there is. That's what makes an archetypal story. There isn't anything deeper than an archetypal story. That's it. That's what makes it archetypal.
But why does Peterson put such emphasis on very specific Christian archetypes, and how on earth has he concluded that these certain variants are perfect and therefore true? Well, in his own words...
Well, okay, so let me tell you why, briefly, why that story is archetypally perfect. Okay, so here's the reason. It's because, as has been agreed upon by the sages of the ages, let's say, the fundamental reality of life is suffering and finitude. And you can layer on top of that, from an existential perspective, malevolence and injustice. And that's the lot of human beings. And so here's an archetypal story. The most perfect, innocent, sinless person possible is betrayed by his friends, his countrymen, and the foreigners simultaneously for no crime whatsoever, in the most torturous possible way, and also abandoned by the creator of being himself. And he accepts that all voluntarily. You see, the reason it's an archetypal story is because you can't get beyond that. You see, it hits a limit. It's the limit of tragedy. And so that's where the perfection lies.
And to provide but one more example, here's how he put it on the Future Thinkers podcast.
So here's an example. So why is the story of Christ an archetypal story? It's because you can't tell a more tragic story. Okay, so why? What's the basis of tragedy? The most terrible set of possible things happens to the least deserving person. Right, and so that's what happens. So what happens to Christ? All his friends reject him. Betrayed, tortured, killed. That'll do it. That's pretty good. You get social rejection, you get betrayal, you get torture, you get death. Okay, plus mental confusion, terrible mental confusion about destiny. That's the Garden of Gethsemane. Right. Okay, so that's on the tragic end. And then on the innocent side, he's the perfect man. And why is he tortured? Because he's good. Archetypal story. You can't push past it. That's what makes it archetypal.
Okay, so Peterson is of course correct when he says that the story of Christ is archetypal, and I go so far as to say that it's a pretty decent one too, but it's not perfect. That is, unless you redefine the word. One could easily make the story more perfect. To quote Sam Harris,
we can go incrementally here because I don't even buy that it's the limit of tragedy. I mean, first of all, the thing is anchored to a belief in human sacrifice. This is what is so weird about Christianity from my point of view, is that this is not a religion that disavows human sacrifice. This is a religion that claims that human sacrifice is real and important, but there was only one that was in fact necessary and effective, and that is the sacrifice of Jesus. I mean, to go back to what you were just
Yes.
saying, this is not the ultimate tragedy because he did take it on voluntarily. It's more tragic if someone really gets screwed by the cosmos.
But despite this, what if Peterson was right? What if the story of Christ was really archetypically perfect? What would this mean? Well, this would mean that it's of immense value, because it would necessarily contain a great deal about our evolved psychology. But it wouldn't mean that it actually happened or that it's true, would it?
Now you might say, is it true? And the answer to that is, it depends on what you mean by true. Is Dostoevsky true? Well, it's fiction. Yeah, but it's more true than real. It's meta-true. It's more real than real. A great novel is more real than real. And a collection of stories like the Bible, that's more real than meta-real. It's more real than fiction is.
So as I was saying earlier, here's where things get really messy, and it's largely because of Peterson's etymology, and more specifically because of the definitions he uses for words such as true, real, perfect, and fact. But as I said in the previous video, while this makes things confusing, it's not flawed. But what is flawed is that he goes on to assert that this metaphorical truth supersedes literal truth, and that therefore, if a fact is metaphorically false, it's also literally false.
The fundamentals of truth are those that guide action, and then the objective science is nested inside that. The ethical pursuit supersedes the scientific pursuit with regards to truth claim.
But I've addressed this in the previous video and so won't do again here. But what I will say is that no, works such as Crime and Punishment, the Bible and Theogony are not more real than real, unless, of course, you redefine the word real. But you know what? If you want to redefine the word real so that someone literally being murdered is less real than someone being murdered in a novel, then as far as I'm concerned, you're intellectually masturbating on the graves of real murder victims. You're playing a language game. Now you've probably noticed that I haven't declared, let alone demonstrated, that Jungian archetypes are in any way flawed, and that's because, if I haven't made this clear already, I'm not convinced that they are. While I think Jung made many unfounded assumptions, I'm convinced that his central claim regarding archetypes was, and still is, solid. He's right. If we want to know what makes a good story, and to understand the deepest parts of our nature, then we need only consult our evolution. There's real value in archetypes, but the problem, again, and this is where Peterson starts to sound new agey, is when he claims that certain very specific expressions of archetypes are true. Or as Harris puts it,
I will grant you that there are means that would amount to a kind of internal costume party, where you can think in terms of myth. If you said to me, Sam, I want you to think of the rest of your day in terms of the hero archetype. What are you doing today to slay the dragon and bring back that hoarded wealth to your community? That's a pattern of thought that I have no question could have some utility, right?
Well, that's what we were doing today, Sam.
Right, but again, the crucial bit is that in doing that, I'm not making claims to knowledge about the ethereal existence of archetypes. There's no, Akashic record or collective unconscious. I'm not making claims of that kind at all in order to find this way of thinking useful. And I'm not aligning myself with any provincial tradition of myth-making, i.e. a religion, and claiming that my religion is better than others, which is, as we see every time we open the newspaper, a divisive game that we have to figure out some way of unraveling.
the last point I want to make is that Peterson himself is an embodiment of an archetype. He's the embodiment of the sacred lobster archetype. Okay, I'm joking, calm down. For tens of thousands of people who are mainly young white males who are being rejected by society, he's the archetype of the loving father. He protects, directs, disciplines, and gives conditional love. He tells his children how to figure out what they value.
This is a process of soul searching. What are you oriented towards?
How to sort their life out.
Clean up your room. That's a good start. Organize your local landscape.
And how to improve themselves.
Stop saying things that violate your conscience.
Hell, he's even just released a book that's purpose is to advise people on how to live. And you know what? That's fantastic. People need loving parental figures, and in the lives of many, Peterson is doing a great service. But this explains, at least to a large extent, why so many of his children won't accept me, the serpent, criticising him, even if, really, deep down, they know that at least some of my criticisms have solid merit. This isn't Jordan's fault, of course, but it's an archetypal irony that's worth noting. Anyhow, as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and those of you who have donated via PayPal. Without your support, videos such as this wouldn't exist. Oh, and as for the winner of this beauty, a signed version of Aron Ra's Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism, it goes to Chris Clark. Congratulations and thank you for your support. Until next time, my fellow apes. Until next time.